Entrails wrapped around tree. Brodir of Man was a Viking sorcerer and war leader who commanded a fleet at the Battle of Clontarf on April 23, 1014. He had joined forces with the Irish king Sigtryg Silkbeard to crush the power of the High King Brian Boru. The battle raged for hours along the coast near Dublin, and as the fighting continued, Brodir saw an opportunity. While most warriors clashed on the open field, Brodir slipped away from the main battle. He moved through the chaos with a small group of men and found the tent where the elderly High King Brian Boru knelt in prayer. The king was 73 years old and no longer fought on the front lines. Brodir entered the tent and struck him down with an axe. It was a quick kill, but it sealed Brodir's fate. Within moments, the king's men discovered what had happened. Wolf the Quarrelsome, Brian Boru's brother, found Brodir trying to escape. He was seized immediately, dragged to a nearby tree, and forced to his knees. What followed was one of the most brutal executions recorded in the sagas. Wolf drew his blade and cut open Brodir's stomach. The wound was deliberate and precise, slicing through skin and muscle to expose the intestines beneath. Brodir was still fully conscious. He felt every sensation as Wolf reached into the opening and pulled out a length of his bowels. The pain was beyond comprehension, a tearing agony that radiated through his entire body. Wolf began walking around the tree trunk, dragging Brodir with him. With each step, more of the intestines unraveled from inside his body. Brodir staggered forward, forced to follow the trail of his own organs as they wrapped around the bark. His legs gave out, but Wolf continued circling. The intestines stretched longer and longer, slick with blood, coiling around the tree like rope. Brodir could not scream. His body was in shock, his breathing shallow and rapid. He collapsed onto the ground, his vision darkening. The last of his entrails pulled free and his body went still. Wolf stood over him, silent. Brodir of Man was dead, his corpse bound to the tree by his own insides. The axe split. Sigurd Snake in the Eye was one of the sons of the legendary Ragnar Lothbrok. He earned his name from a distinctive mark in his left eye, where the pupil appeared to be encircled by a serpent. By 891, he had established himself as a powerful leader in Denmark, but his family was tearing itself apart over land and succession. The feud had been building for months. Sigurd's nephew believed he had a rightful claim to territories that Sigurd controlled. Disputes over boundaries turned into threats, and threats turned into open confrontation. On the day of his death, Sigurd met with his nephew to settle the matter. The meeting was supposed to be peaceful, but both men brought armed retainers. Trust had eroded completely. The argument escalated quickly. Words became shouts, and suddenly the nephew lunged forward. He carried a heavy battle axe, the kind designed to cleave through shields and armor. He raised it high above his head and brought it down with full force onto Sigurd's shoulder. The blade struck just above the collarbone with a sickening crack. Bone splintered instantly as the axe drove downward through muscle and tissue. The weapon did not stop at the shoulder. It continued its path deep into Sigurd's chest cavity, cutting through ribs and into the organs beneath. The impact was so violent that Sigurd's body buckled under the weight of the blow. He remained conscious for several seconds. His brain had not yet registered the severity of the injury. He looked down and saw the axe embedded in his torso, blood pouring from the wound in thick pulses. He tried to lift his arm, but the limb would not respond. The collarbone was destroyed, the muscles severed. His breathing became rapid and shallow as blood filled his chest. Sigurd dropped to his knees, then collapsed forward onto the ground. His vision began to fade. The last thing his snake-marked eye saw was the dirt beneath him turning dark with his own blood. Within moments, the eye went still. Sigurd Snake in the Eye was dead at the hands of his own family, drowned in Dung Ice. Halfdan the Black was the king of Vestfold and the father of Harald Fairhair, who would later unite Norway. In the winter of 860, Halfdan was 40 years old and ruled over prosperous lands in southern Norway. He had just attended a feast at a farmstead and was making his way home across the frozen Randsfjorden Lake. It was a journey he had made many times before. The ice on the lake appeared solid. Winter had set in weeks earlier, and the surface had frozen thick enough to support horses and sleighs. Halfdan rode in a sleigh pulled by his horse, moving steadily across the white expanse. What he did not know was that cattle had been brought to a watering hole near his crossing point. The animals had trampled the ice repeatedly, and their waste had mixed with the water below, creating pockets of weakness beneath the surface. Without warning, the ice gave way. The crack was sudden and loud, splitting open beneath the weight of the horse and sleigh. Halfdan plunged through into the water below. The cold was immediate and paralyzing, a shock that seized his lungs and made it impossible to draw breath. He thrashed in the darkness, but his heavy winter clothing soaked through instantly, pulling him downward. The water was not just freezing. It was thick with cattle dung that had seeped through cracks in the ice over the course of weeks. The foul mixture surrounded him, filling his nose and mouth as he struggled to stay afloat. He could not see. The hole above him was small, and the current beneath the ice pulled him away from it. His hands clawed at the underside of the frozen surface, searching desperately for the opening, but he could not find it. His lungs burned. He gasped involuntarily and inhaled the filthy water. It flooded his throat and chest, choking him. His movement slowed, his strength draining in the freezing darkness. Within moments, Halfdan the Black stopped struggling. His body drifted beneath the ice, suspended in the manure-filled water. The king of Vestfold drowned in filth, far from the dignity his title deserved. Arrow pulled from heart. Thormod Kolbrunarskald was a warrior poet who fought at the Battle of Stiklestad on July 29, 1030. He served King Olaf Haraldsson, composing verses in his honor while also fighting alongside him in battle. The Skalds were known for their ability to endure pain without complaint, and Thormod would prove this reputation in the final moments of his life. During the fighting, an arrow struck Thormod in the chest. The impact knocked him backward, but he remained standing. He looked down and saw the shaft protruding from his ribs, embedded deep in his torso. Blood seeped through his clothing, but he did not collapse. Instead, he turned and walked away from the battlefield, moving steadily toward a hut where wounded men were being treated. Inside the hut, a healer examined the wound. The arrow had gone in at an angle, lodged somewhere near the heart. The healer brought out a pair of iron tongs and attempted to grip the shaft, intending to pull it free. He tugged carefully, but the arrow would not move. It was stuck fast, the barbed head caught in bone or tissue. The process was slow and excruciating. Thormod grew impatient. He pushed the healer's hands away, reached down, and gripped the arrow shaft himself. Without hesitation, he pulled. The barbs tore through muscle and tissue as the arrow came free. Blood poured from the wound immediately. But Thormod did not cry out. He held the arrow up to examine it. Stuck to the barbs were small strands of tissue, red and white fibers clinging to the metal. Thormod recognized what he was looking at. They were pieces of his own heart, torn loose by the arrow's removal. He stared at them for a moment, then spoke calmly. He said the king had fed him well, pointing to the layers of fat still visible on the tissue. His legs buckled. The blood loss was immediate and overwhelming. Thormod collapsed onto the floor of the hut, the arrow still gripped in his hand. His breathing stopped within seconds. Thormod Kolbrunarskald was dead, having pulled the instrument of his death from his own chest. Death jump in armor. Olaf Tryggvason was the king of Norway and one of the most celebrated naval commanders of his time. On September 9, 1000, his fleet engaged in the Battle of Svolder in the Baltic Sea. He faced a coalition of enemies, the combined forces of the Swedish king, the Danish king, and a Norwegian earl. Their ships surrounded his vessel, the Long Serpent, cutting off any route of escape. The battle had raged for hours. Olaf's men fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. One by one, the ships in his fleet were boarded or sunk. The Long Serpent stood alone, encircled by enemy vessels closing in from all sides. Olaf looked around and understood that defeat was certain. Capture was imminent, and he knew what awaited him if he was taken alive. He made his decision quickly. Olaf grabbed his shield and held it above his head. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the rail of the ship and leaped into the Baltic Sea. He wore full battle armor, chainmail that covered his torso, and weapons strapped to his body. The weight was immense. The moment he hit the water, he began to sink. The armor pulled him down immediately, dragging him beneath the surface with brutal speed. He could not swim. The chainmail was too heavy, the weight of the metal overwhelming any attempt to stay afloat. Water rushed into his nose and mouth as he plunged deeper into the cold darkness. His lungs burned. He tried to kick upward, but the armor held him like an anchor. The surface above grew farther away with each second, the light fading as he descended. The pressure in his chest became unbearable. He gasped involuntarily and inhaled seawater. It flooded his throat and lungs, choking him. His vision darkened, and his movements slowed. Olaf Tryggvason sank into the depths of the Baltic Sea. His body was never recovered. Somewhere far below the surface, he remained, still clad in the armor that ensured his death. He chose his fate rather than face capture, and the sea claimed him completely. Speared through the neck. Magnus Barefoot was the king of Norway, known for his aggressive campaigns across the North Atlantic. He earned his nickname by adopting the Irish style of dress, wearing a kilt instead of trousers. On August 24, 1103, he led a military expedition into Ulster, Ireland, pushing deep into unfamiliar territory. His ships were anchored along the coast, but Magnus chose to move inland with a portion of his men. They entered a marshy area, a low-lying stretch of bogland where the ground was soft and treacherous. Water pooled in every depression, and thick mud sucked at their boots with each step. The terrain slowed their movement significantly. It was the worst possible place to be ambushed, and that is exactly what happened. Irish forces had been tracking Magnus and his men. They struck without warning, emerging from the surrounding brush and launching their attack. A spear flew through the air and struck Magnus in both thighs, piercing through the flesh and pinning his legs together. He fell forward into the mud. The weapon lodged deep in his body. He tried to stand, but the spear held him in place. The mud clung to him, thick and heavy, making it impossible to pull free. He was stuck, helpless, his legs useless beneath him. Blood poured from the wounds in his thighs, mixing with the dark water around him. He could hear his men shouting, the sounds of fighting all around, but no one could reach him in time. A second attacker approached. Magnus looked up and saw the man raising a weapon, either an axe or another spear. He could not move. The weapon came down with full force and struck him in the neck. The blade cut deep, severing through muscle and veins. Blood sprayed from the wound, pouring into the bog around him. Magnus collapsed face first into the mud. The wound in his neck made breathing impossible. He choked on his own blood, his body convulsing once before going still. Magnus barefoot died in the Irish bog, far from the ships that could have saved him, his body half submerged in filth and water. Burn alive inside house. Earl Ragnvald Eysteinsson was the Earl of Myr in Norway and one of the most influential advisors in the kingdom. Around 894, his power had grown to a level that made others jealous, particularly the sons of King Harald Fairhair. They saw Ragnvald as a threat to their own ambitions and decided to eliminate him. They chose to act at night, when he would be most vulnerable. Ragnvald was in his wooden hall with 60 of his men. The structure was large and sturdy, built from thick timber, but, like all Viking halls, it was designed for feasting and shelter, not defense. The sons of Harald surrounded the building after dark, moving quietly to ensure no one escaped. They carried torches and oil, and once every exit was blocked, they set the hall on fire. The flames spread quickly. The dry wood caught instantly, and within moments the walls were engulfed. Inside, Ragnvald and his men realized what was happening. They rushed to the doors, but the attackers had barricaded them from the outside. The windows were too small to climb through. They were trapped. Smoke filled the hall first, thick and choking. The men coughed violently, their eyes burning as they struggled to breathe. The heat became unbearable within seconds. The fire climbed the walls and spread across the ceiling, turning the entire structure into an oven. Skin began to blister from the intense temperature. The men screamed, pounding on the doors, begging to be let out, but no one came. The roof collapsed inward, sending burning timber crashing down onto the men below. Some were crushed instantly, while others were pinned beneath the flaming wreckage, their clothes catching fire. The screaming continued for several minutes, then slowly faded as the smoke suffocated them or the flames consumed them entirely. By morning, the hall was nothing but charred remains. The attackers waited outside through the entire night, ensuring no one survived. All 60 men, including Earl Ragnvald Eysteinsson, burned to death inside. The treachery shocked the Norse world and led to brutal retribution against those responsible. Arrow through the throat. Harald Hardrada was often called the last great Viking, a towering figure who had fought across Europe and the Mediterranean. By September 25, 1066, he was the king of Norway and had invaded England with a massive army determined to claim the English throne. The Battle of Stamford Bridge would decide his fate. Harold led his forces with confidence that morning. He had already defeated one English army days earlier and expected another easy victory. In his overconfidence, he made a fatal mistake. He chose not to wear his body armor. The day was warm, and the heavy chainmail seemed unnecessary. He fought in his tunic, exposed and vulnerable. The battle turned brutal quickly. English forces under King Harold Godwinson attacked with unexpected ferocity, and the fighting became chaotic. Arrows filled the air, launched in volleys from English archers positioned across the battlefield. Harold moved through the combat, shouting orders and swinging his weapon, unaware of the danger approaching him. A single arrow flew through the chaos. It was not aimed specifically at him, just one of hundreds released into the mass of fighters. The arrow struck Harold directly in the throat. The impact was sudden and precise, the sharp head piercing through his windpipe and lodging deep in his neck. Harold dropped his weapon and grabbed at his throat. Blood poured from the wound, thick and fast, streaming down his chest. He tried to breathe, but his windpipe was blocked. Air would not pass. He gasped, choking on the blood that filled his mouth and throat. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the ground. The battle continued around him. Men stepped over his body, too focused on their own survival to notice the fallen king. Harold clawed at his neck, his movements growing weaker as the blood drained from him. He could not call for help. He could not breathe. His vision dimmed, and his body went limp. Harold Hardrada died on English soil, suffocated by his own blood. His death marked the end of the Viking age of conquest. No major Viking invasion would ever threaten England again.